What is up, y'all? TAIJ. Thank Allah it is Juma. I hope you're having an amazing weekend. Guys, I'm feeling great. My coffee's kicking in, and we have a amazing show full of topics for you today. We're going to get into a controversy about the Muslim call to prayer, also known as the Adhan. But before we just analyze that, we also need to analyze the whole presentation from the Muslim community during this interfaith prayer service that the president and all of his supporters, the vice president and their families all attended. Then, in that very same prayer service, a Episcopal bishop essentially declares jihad on Donald Trump, and it is glorious. This woman was incredibly brave, and we're going to break her speech down, talk about the positive, the negative, and what could be done to understand it and maybe counteract some of the tribalism that's coming out of it. After that, I want to really talk about preachers in the public square, our clerics in civics, and think about should they really be incorporating, like performative things and, like appeasing the audience for entertainment values into their presentation. We're going to explore that just a tad. And we're going to wrap it up, guys, with one of the best speeches I've heard in years. It is a local imam here, local to me in Colorado, who gave an amazing talk at a uh, Dr. Martin Luther King prayer breakfast. Um, and he did it in a way full of tact that was appropriate, but still said the things that need to be said. And again, in such a way that it was beautiful and incredibly well received. Now, without further ado, I want to play the beginning of the Muslim presentation at the National Cathedral with the incoming president and his family and supporters uh, all together watching. So let's get into it right now.
We seek refuge with Allah from Satan rejected. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. He is the one who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Then he established himself on the throne. He knows whatever goes into the earth and whatever comes out of it, and whatever descends from the sky and whatever ascends into it. And he is with you wherever you are. For Allah is all-seeing of what you do. And to Allah all matters are returned. He merges the night into the day and the day into the night. He knows best what is hidden in the heart. Believe in Allah and His Messenger, and donate from what He has entrusted with you. So those of you who believe and donate will have a mighty reward.
Hey guys, before we get into the Adhan there, I want to talk a little bit about the overall goal of something like this. Um, For me, the quintessential message of Islam is Allah's oneness, God's unity, because that's what makes us incredibly unique. Two things I think off the bat. One is we have a label for the follower of the religion, Muslim, and then we have a separate label, different label for the religion itself. And there's millions of things we can say about that. But more importantly, is when you have this kind of international stage. Um, we're going to explore through some of the comments that are coming through. I think a lot about the overall presentation, but again, the quintessential message of Islam is God's unity. However, the verses that the Imam selected and recited, of course, have beautiful meaning and were probably illuminating to people who have never seen or heard from Muslims before. So I'm not going to give any kind of demerit there. Just I would like to say personally, as a PR person, my first choice would have been something like Surah Fatiha, because of it being the most recited verse of ours, and it has so many similarities with prayers like the Lord's Prayer that Christians are familiar with, or possibly Surah Ikhlas and that focusing on God's unity. However, there's a wisdom in all things, and I wasn't the one chosen to do this. They were, and that is by God's decree. And all I can do is really pray for them and ask Allah to bless them and accept from them and give the best outcome. So I want to get back into the video because the controversy has been about this next part. Let's go.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
God is the greatest. God is the greatest.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
God is the greatest. God is the greatest.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله
I bear witness there's no deity but God.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله
Testify there's no deity but God, worthy of worship.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله
I bear witness that Muhammad is God's messenger.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله
I bear witness that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the prophet of God.
حي الله الصلاة
Come to prayer.
حي الله الصلاة
Come to prayer.
حي الله الفلاح حي الله الفلاح
Come to success. Come to success.
الله أكبر الله أكبر
God is the greatest. God is the greatest.
لا إله إلا الله
Okay, guys, there's a lot to say here because the response from people, I think, has been almost ridiculous. I want to point out a few things in particular. One person actually posted this. Uh, we're going to get into it. Who this is the weakest Adhan performance I've ever heard. And unfortunately, millions of people were watching. The Adhan is usually delivered by skilled individuals with captivating voices. However, or no, whoever allowed this must be held accountable and explain their motives. Okay, a lot of privilege there. For sure, Allah is beauty and loves beauty. But let's think about what's beautiful to us versus what could be beautiful to God. Just as a quick example, uh, there is a hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, talking about the breath of a fasting person, which can be pretty funky, smells to God like musk. And so I think that we should be judging this on a number of levels, not just if we think it is the most melodic uh, call to prayer that you've ever heard. There's a couple of other really interesting comments. I don't want to spend too much time just because I've seen things like, that's not a call to prayer. This man is singing like a troll. Um, I don't think his voice matters. The only thing that matters is the message in the Adhan. And the problem here is that they didn't translate it. Um, and then there's just a ton of like things like this person isn't a good Muslim and he shouldn't have done this. He should have got somebody else. You're getting the picture of these comments online. And I want to really focus on something that is, I think, so much more important. This group of people come from one of the oldest mosques in the DC area. It's literally called the Nation's Mosque, or um, Muhammad Masjid. And it is founded by originally the founder of the Nation of Islam. And then his son, just a quick history lesson for those who might not know, what if D. Muhammad accepted Orthodox Islam and broke from NOI, the Nation of Islam, and their teaching to become an actual Orthodox Muslim. Now, for the NOI people that might be seeing this, I do see that you guys are making steps continuously towards more uh, authentic Islamic teachings. Um, but for sure, what if the Muhammad took about half of the followers of the nation in the kind of tail end of the civil rights era and brought them to normative Islam? And because of that, if you're talking to an America First crowd, why not choose an indigenous American community and Islamic tradition? The only thing that got immigrant over that tradition of the What If D or the WD community is that a vast majority of them are descendants of slaves, meaning they were captured and brought here their own will. And so that authenticity that amazing history that both throws into the face of bigots, again, slavery, also shows that American Islam, if there is such a thing, because I think Islam is Islam, but it gets expressed differently from time and place. But American Muslims, more importantly, are diverse and also 100% authentically. So I think there's a number of things here. The one thing I would say is the verses of the Quran. I kind of question why they chose those. I mean, they demonstrate Allah's majesty, Allah's dominion, which is fantastic, and they also demonstrate, a serious commitment to giving charity, which is again all great messaging. For me, I would have probably focused on something like the Fatiha, which is has comparisons, and like someone who's a Christian would recognize elements that are similar to the Lord's Prayer, or maybe Surah Ikhlas, to focus on Tawheed, or God's unity, as the defining factor of Islam. Now, I want to switch over to probably what you all came here for, and that is the Episcopal bishop calling out Trump to his face. Now, I need to set it up very quickly because not only does she call him out to his face, but it is at the tail end of what's called a homily. A homily is kind of the sermon portion of a service. Episcopals, just in case you don't know, I was raised Catholic before I became Muslim. So Episcopals are kind of like the rebel Catholics. They broke off, but their services and theology is very similar. Um, and the homily is kind of an explanation of, especially New Testament, but doesn't have to be. It could be any biblical teachings or a combination of Old and New Testament teachings. And her homily, I did watch it, focused on issues of justice, compassion, mercy. Um, Jesus being, peace be upon him, being among the sick and the sinners and calling people to God. Essentially, core Christian theology. And the backlash that you'll see after we go into her calling out Trump to his face is pretty incredible. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God.
Now, this is so important because, again, like I said earlier, she had already given the bulk of the homily, and then she stops and she says a final plea, meaning the entire homily on being just, being merciful, welcoming the stranger, all of those things was her core message to the president. But then she calls him out directly to his face. And then she actually uses his own words from just a few days ago, where he was reflecting on feeling, saved or spared by God and God's mercy after the assassination attempts, and then uses that to frame her messaging, which is incredibly effective and strategic messaging technique. So kudos to the bishop for starting this strong.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives.
Now, I'm not going to get into the LGBTQ plus issue on this video. I will, if you guys comment below and want me to, I can get a theologian from the Muslim community and we can have a detailed discussion on that. What I want us to be very cognizant of is that we approach this whole thing with a bit of nuance. I want us to make sure that we don't get bogged down on one issue because, like, personally, I was heartened to see President Trump do an executive order recognizing just two genders. That's what I believe. I think that it's common sense. I think it's consistent with Islamic teaching and biology and science. Um, However, the key here is the message from the pastor is mercy. Don't be a jerk. Don't be a bully. Don't punch down on people. Um, and essentially, treat people with the golden rule. And I think that's something that we need to think a lot more about and we need to be more nuanced. And more importantly, though, is this isn't the only issue that the pastor calls out. So back to the video. Let's go.
And the people The people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation.
Now, it's really important that you notice a few things. When she did mention the LGBTQ plus community, she was very strategic in her messaging, and this you have to appreciate by saying that they're in Republican, Democrat, and independent families. What she did was basically say and called out every major political identity within the United States. So that was a strategic win for her in how she did the messaging. Then she immediately transferred over to the immigration and refugee issue. And then talking about this idea of mercy should overcome other angles. And I don't know what's making the hard right, white nationalist, and Christian nationalists more upset, the LGBTQ plus issue or immigration and refugees. But from here, you should know. And if you look up the bishop, you're going to see a ton of memes vilifying her, calling her a false prophet, drawing horns on her, all these things. But one of the funniest responses I saw to that is nothing makes Christian nationalists and white supremacists more angry than the teachings of Jesus, which I thought was hilarious. So let's go back to the video because she continues to do some things that, from communications theory and strategic communication, is incredibly solid. And I want to keep pointing those out.
The vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples.
And right there, she covered all the people who also participated in this prayer service because it was an interfaith service. But she also, showed that by way of the different types of houses of worship, that she was a supporter of the First Amendment and of equal protection of the law to all people who practice faith in the United States, which is, again, such an important angle that I think was often overlooked and neglected by activists when it comes to working for the faith community. We tend to fall into our own in-group, out-group dynamics and don't always stick to messaging that is more universal and easier to coalition build with.
I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger.
All right, guys. I want us to keep thinking about what we just saw. First, I did call it a jihad, and I wanted to make sure I contextualize that because I think I can already hear the haters out there. There is a hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that says the best form of jihad, or among the best forms of jihad, depending on which hadith narration you go with. The best of jihad is a just word spoken to an unjust ruler. Or another narration is the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said, the best fighting in the path of God is to speak a word of justice to an oppressive ruler. So her call out, I would say very strongly, qualifies as a form of jihad. But I want us to think a little bit more about this idea of being performative. And I think performative can be a distraction. And I'm setting up a clip from President Trump in response to what you just saw. So let's get there and see how that goes because um, there's a huge trend towards us focusing on those kinds of issues.
What did you think of this? What did you think of the service?
What did you think? Did you like it? Did you find it exciting? Not
Did you find it exciting?
too exciting, was it? I didn't think it was a good service, no. Thank you very much.
So, this whole thing about performative, this is an incredibly smooth way that the president distracted from the core message of the bishop. I mean, she was talking about mercy, she was criticizing um, immigration policy, refugee policy, all types of other policies, and trying to humanize people that have been often dehumanized. And Again, I'm not to say I'm 100% behind her. I obviously have different theology, obviously have different values, especially when it comes to the LGBT plus issue. And I also have mixed feelings on immigration. But what I don't like is the government being weaponized to abuse and harm already vulnerable populations. And I think that's something that is terrible. Most Americans are more good natured than that. Hate it. So you have to dehumanize people. And when that doesn't work, or you're confronted with a religious authority actually using their voice to speak to potential abuses of the government. Trump was so slick here. They asked what, and this was also a bad question by the reporter. They asked, "What do you think of the service?" And instead of dealing with the content of the speech, the points that she brought up, he literally goes to the performative nature. A lot like the people criticizing the Adhan, talking about how beautiful the voice was, if it should have been him or not. Instead of thinking about the ayah or how the Adhan should have been translated so people knew what was being said, they're only thinking about how melodic it was. And this is such a terrible distraction because in communications theory, if you can get people thinking about that type of stuff, basically emotional thinking. They're not thinking about the criticism of the president. So he basically preserved his base and weaponized them. That's why you're seeing all the attacks against the bishop. And then you're seeing the predictable response against people who want to support her. And it's just further dividing society. The reporter should have been smart. They should have said, "What do you think about the bishop's message?" That way he couldn't have weaseled out so easily. So make sure you pay attention when people use distraction and when preachers are being requested and focusing on more performative natures rather than the substance of what they're saying. Of course, it's always better to have beautiful speech, beautiful recitation. But the most important thing is actually the message being sent. And if you can combine those things, even better. But if not, focus on the message. Now, back to the video because we're about to get into one of my favorite things that I've seen in a couple of years, one of the best speeches I've seen in a long time. Now, I do have to admit this was a personal friend, and it's here in my backyard. And I want to set this up by saying I recorded the video myself on my phone. The house sound system was trash, so I apologize for the audio quality of this video you're about to see. However, I did do a lot to improve it. I ran it through several AI noise reduction filters, and then I added subtitles. So most of the time, I'm going to be off screen, um, and then I will pause and comment just so that the subtitles are as big as possible. So in case you're having trouble hearing, you will know what the imam is saying.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. In the name of Allah, most high, most merciful, most compassionate, peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad and all the prophets that came before him. It's hard to follow such distinguished guests and community and faith leaders who have so many years of service. We have a lot to live up to and we have a lot of work to do.
This is really important that the imam started this way by recognizing the efforts of people that have came before him. Because again, this is a faith organization, faith leaders led event, and it was a prayer breakfast and it was interfaith. I do believe this was the first time Muslims were invited to participate with a clergyman, a religious leader, an imam. And so for him to start by recognizing the good work in Aurora by the faith community, it shows that he's not disrespectful or a bull in a china shop. He's literally recognizing the accomplishments and the service of those who came before him, which always creates goodwill. It's just so important when you're public speaking.
I greet each and every one of you with the greeting of peace, salam, this morning. My name is Shamsuddin bin Rasul. I'm a Colorado native and raised here in Mariann. I'm the Director of State Affairs and Community Engagement at Episcopal County and a local member of the Colorado Imam Council.
This is really important too, because if you can't see very closely, he's wearing a kafaya as well as a kufi. So he looks very visibly Arab and Muslim combined in this particular case. And what's so important about it is I'm sure if he didn't say he was a Colorado native, people would have been like, oh, look at this guy who's not even from here. But by focusing on how he was born in Colorado and raised in Aurora, the city where this is happening, and the city under which the Faith Leaders Organization organized the event, it makes it even more powerful what he's about to say.
It's an honor to welcome you all on behalf of the diverse for our Muslim community to this prayer breakfast and to offer some quick reflections.
And that's also really important. He focused on the diversity of the Muslim community. Now, Aurora, for those of you outside of Colorado, you may not know, Aurora is a really large chunk of land. It's basically a suburb of Denver, but it is the most diverse city in the state of Colorado, diverse across ethnic, religious, and racial lines. But he's also making sure that people know how diverse Muslims in Colorado are, which is incredibly important.
And a short prayer as we commemorate the profound life of Reverend Dr. Martin King. While reflecting on his legacy, I was struck by how much he accomplished in just a short 39 years. And I wonder what our world would be now like if hate did not take him from us prematurely.
I think this is strategic. The Imam did such a fantastic job. I don't know exactly his intention on every part of the speech, but by focusing on how much he got done and what the future could have been like if he wasn't assassinated, it's almost like saying we're not honoring the activists of our time and we're not giving them the ability to be as impactful.
I want us to remember how bold he was, because today his life and legacy is often sanitized, watered down, and his courage, convictions, and moral fortitude are too often forgotten and ignored.
Now, this is a common theme that I find from people when talking about MLK, that Dr. King has been um, utilized for other people's agendas, that he's almost his legacy now is almost like used to make people feel comfortable and not, recognize how much he pushed the envelope and how hard he stood for justice and how much that angered the people of his time. So we're about to get into more of that, but I just wanted you to know the Imam was the second to last speaker in about an hour and a half long event, and he's the only one that brought up the within Dr. King's lifetime reaction to how Dr. King was perceived, um, and especially when he started opposing Vietnam War.
We forget that in his time, he was slandered in the media and by fellow Christians. He was called a communist, a radical, an extremist, a criminal, a charlatan, threatened, attacked multiple times, and tragically assassinated.
And this is important that he mentioned by fellow Christians. So this is one of the things that we see often today. History rhyming. I don't think it repeats itself, but when people have disagreement over political issues, the attacks that hurt you the most often come from your own faith community. And I think that's a really important call out.
In 1966, twice as many Americans had an unfavorable opinion of Dr. King as a favorable one of him. Near the end of his life, and once Dr. King began to oppose the war in Vietnam now, the Dallas Morning News went to the column that called Dr. King the headline hunting high priest of nonviolent violence. And he's just seeking headlines. And just 6 days after his death, Virginia Congressman William Tuck blamed King for his own assassination.
All of that. Um, and what's important to note here is that the Imam mentioned the media attacking Dr. King while he was alive, and then the US government officials attacking Dr. King immediately after he died. So this is coordinated, not necessarily like on purpose, could be separate groups, just kind of reading the tea leaves and not leading, but trying to manage what was current public opinion. And so the idea here that's so important, though, is that if you are a citizen alive at that time, you're seeing all the levers of power being opposed to him, the government, elected officials, and the media.
Telling the House of Representatives that King fomented discord and strife between the races, and said that he who sows the seed of sin shall reap and harvest a whirlwind of evil.
Now, the sad thing here is that they're blaming the guy protesting for freedom as the person who's creating the strife amongst racial groups, which is crazy. And then on top of that, the congressman actually said that he was, sowing the seeds of evil, so he'll have, or sowing the seeds of sin, so he'll have an evil end. I want you to keep this theme of reaping what you sow in mind for the rest of the speech.
However, he was resilient. Dr. King was resilient in holding many ways, from pursuing education, both formal and practical, including even traveling all the way to South Asia and meeting with Gandhi, a Hindu, and demonstrated for us the power of interfaith relationship building.
And that's key to this meeting because this is what the meeting was for. It was an interfaith prayer breakfast, and it was to bring people across faith traditions in the city of Aurora together, honoring Dr. King. And so he's literally both giving an example of how faith communities can and should learn from one another, respect one another, work together, but then also saying it in a setting so it speaks directly to the people, and that empowers his future words coming forward.
As a Muslim, this reminds me of some verses in the Holy Quran where Allah, Most High, God Most High, He says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. O humankind, indeed, we created you from male and female, made you into peoples and tribes, so that you can know one another. Surely the most noble of you, in the sight of God, is not your skin color, your language, your race, or part of the world, economic class. The most noble of you in the sight of God is the most righteous amongst you. God is truly all-knowing and all-aware.
What's interesting to me here is the Imam could have, and I think he probably left this out for brevity because each speech was, between 5 and 10 minutes. And this one was clocked in at 8 minutes. But he could have easily brought up the Prophet, peace be upon him's last sermon, where he states the Arab is not better than the non-Arab, nor is the white better than the black. Um, or the black better than the white, or the non-Arab better than the Arab, and then says the same thing: the most righteous, the most honored of you are the closest to God. Um, but I do want you to see how he's setting up this concept of justice, and then keep that in mind with reaping what you sow.
We must not forget the legacy of justice of Dr. King. In his speeches and writings, Dr. King consistently made the case for justice by focusing on theology and through theology.
And this is key because it's true that Dr. King was inspired and used his theology to make the case for freedom and justice during the civil rights movement, but he's also speaking to a room full of pastors and faith leaders. So again, he's everything he's doing is building a logical case in a way that we should be learning from history.
He said to me, it's taking the first step even when you can't see the whole staircase. And he said that true peace is not merely the absence of tension. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. It is the presence of justice. In his later letter from the Birmingham jail, where he was jailed unjustly, it reminded us that oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The urge for freedom will eventually come.
So important because, again, he's wearing a kafaya, he's visibly Muslim, he's using the words of Dr. King to tell us that we should be mindful of the events that are happening in the world today.
And he said injustice everywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And he said he was cognizant, aware of the interrelatedness of all communities. And that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one affects us all indirectly.
And this is also an Islamic concept, especially across humans. So, one of the things that I wanted to just point out is that this idea that justice you know, causes or injustice causes problems throughout human societies. It's something that we can't overlook. And I'm just want to say that I'm personally very disappointed with most of the interfaith community, in particular across the nation, and also a lot of faith leaders. Now, there are exceptions. There are movements within the Catholic Church, of course, the Muslim community, of course, especially the younger Jewish community, Jews for Peace, and Not in Our Name, and other groups that are all out protesting the genocide happening in Gaza. But for me, it's just incredibly important that we realize that no one gets out of these terrible events scot free, that it tarnishes in the entire world and all of us, which is a incredible call out that the Imam just did.
These his words still ring true today. In that same letter, Dr. King questioned his critics for their concern over the action of nonviolent civil disobedience, and concerned that he was nonviolently disobeying and seeking justice. And he notes that they did not question the conditions that brought those demonstrations into being.
And this might be the mic drop moment of the whole speech, because it was so true back then and it's so true now. And remember how Trump, when he was asked what did he think of the sermon, he went into the entertainment value of it. This is that distraction technique I was talking about. This is where a person will not want to deal with the topic, so then they will change the discussion on a protest from being about what's being protested, the actual issue, to the behavior of the protesters, to if they're doing everything perfectly, debating on the impact, debating on the students, casting aspersions on them, just like aspersions and negativity was cast on Dr. King. So again, history rhyming, not repeating, but lessons not being learned. And that's kind of the call out here. It's an amazing speech. I'm so proud that this Imam put it together.
What were those conditions that allowed me to come out and forced me to come out and protest for that? This reminds us of a verse in the Holy Qur'an where God tells us, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ. Or you who have believed, be personally standing firm in justice, witness for God, even if it is against your own selves. Justice, even if against your own selves, or parents, or relatives, whether one is rich or poor, God is more worthy of both.
Love that he picked this verse of the Quran. And that's why I was saying, like, I kind of questioned the wisdom in the Muslim presentation at the National Cathedral. They probably weren't messaging directly to the incoming president, Donald Trump. They were probably messaging to the people who would be watching it across the globe. But I think that a verse like this in this setting on MLK Day to interfaith pastors in the most diverse city in Colorado, but it could be applied to any setting, is so important, because it's actually telling us beware of our own self, beware of becoming hypocrites. And it is a fantastic point to make, because he gave an example of how fellow Christians were being hypocrites in the Birmingham letter towards MLK.
So follow not your personal desires, lest you not be just. And God tells us, in concluding, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. God warns us, as leaders, as faith leaders. He says, do not spread corruption in the land and misguide people. And so when they were talking to those people, they said, we are the peacemakers. And God replies back to them, indeed, it's they who are the corruptors, but they fail to realize. So we ask God to clear the cover from our hearts and make us the true peacemakers, the true seekers of justice, to see clearly with our eyes and to see clearly with our hearts as well. We ask God, our Creator, the most merciful, the most compassionate, to give us all the strength to live by our convictions as boldly as Dr. King did. I pray that Allah guides us to what pleases Him, protects us, and all of our community leaders and first responders and those that protects us from our own mistake and our own desires and from an evil end.
Remember the sowing what you reap?
I pray that we gather here today and always in peace and salam, that we build a community of peace, mutual respect, justice, and serve and love amongst our families and our circles and we serve those less fortunate in our entire nation. God bless our nation. Bless you all. Amen. Thank you very much.
This is probably the most well-received speech of the entire time I was there. Um, and after the speech, the Imam was just inundated with people wanting to get to know him, people giving him their contact information. And it just kind of tells, how effective the speech was. I think he did a fantastic job. And I hope my breakdown will help us as we're doing presentations in the future and doing civic duty be more effective. Because the key here is when you think about your messaging and you use your head and prepare before you're on stage or reaching or doing outreach, you actually can say what needs to be said in a way that will resonate with your audience and that is appropriate and respectful to the event that you're doing. Missing opportunities like that is such a hard thing on the Muslim community because, I had civic duty up there as my last point. And look, I know what I'm about to say coming from someone who looks like me. People don't even know that I'm Muslim unless I tell them. Um, and, regardless of me having, almost 2 decades of activism in civil rights and First Amendment work, the point that I need to make is that often the Muslim community in particular, but also any other oppressed, underserved, marginalized communities, we very often get focused in on fighting for our rights, which we have to do. But we sometimes forget, fulfilling our responsibilities. And that's one of the most important parts here, because especially for the American Muslim community, is that we have dedicated bigots, Muslim and Islam haters out there doing everything they can to poison pill people against our community. So we have to embrace our status of what I've been calling the quintessential First Amendment community, because the Christian right, as I've showed in previous videos and will show in very soon future videos, they're weaponizing their faith identity to use the First Amendment instead of uplifting and protecting all Americans and making things better for everyone, to privilege themselves, especially white Christians who are also Christian nationalists. And they want to have not only a privilege for themselves, but to suppress and abuse others by weaponizing their faith community and weaponizing their identity and use the First Amendment in ways it wasn't designed for. So to meet that challenge, we have to be active. We have to go and do outreach and let people know who we really are. And to do that, it requires us to be brave. It requires us to utilize the resources that we have and to consult with people before we go out and do public messaging. That's how you have wisdom, and that's how we can be more effective. Now, I started this program off saying, thank God it is Friday, and I want you guys all to have an amazing weekend. Thank you for spending your time with me. I also need to shout out a particular subscriber who completely, revamped my entire studio by donating new lighting for me. And my prayers are with you. You know who you are. I think you don't want to be identified, but I'm forever grateful, and I will keep you in my prayers. Thank you so much. Anyone who wants to support my work, you can find resources, things that you can use, other articles in the description below. Also a Buy Me Coffee and a Patreon link. So I do put all of your donations directly back into the show to better serve you. So thank you in advance for all your support, and thank you for your time with me today. Have a fantastic weekend. May God bless you all. May we live, like the Imam said, in a community of peace and mutual respect.
Isa. Okay. Isa? Yes. Isa Galloway.
Isa Galloway.
Isa Galloway.
Isa Galloway.
Isa Galloway, convert to Islam, defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future, and a more sophisticated approach